Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reeder with Future Pastimes, and I'm the designer of the Ecaz and Mauritania expansion, which is the third expansion for the Classic Dune board game, the 2019 Gale Force 9 edition. In this video, we're going to be talking about a power alliance that I call the Marriage Alliance, and that is one that exists between House Atreides and House Ecaz. Now, it might also be called the Almost Marriage Alliance, and that is because if you've read Dune, you know that Duke Leto is not married. And if you read the prequel books, you'll understand a little bit more about why it's almost marriage. But suffice it to say that the theme of Ecaz is that they're forging strong alliances, and that was going to be through marriage primarily, because the Archduke had daughters, and in the patriarchy of the Dune universe, heads of households with daughters see the daughters as largely being useful to form an alliance through marriage. So it is what it is, but this particular alliance can be very powerful and strong because of what both factions bring to the table and how they can coalesce together with those abilities. So let's take a look at that a little bit more closely. With the Atreides, of course, they always are going to be able to offer prescience in their battle plan for their ally, and that can be especially useful in an alliance with Ecaz. For a couple of reasons. The card knowledge that Atreides has is going to be especially useful when these two factions are co-occupied in a territory, in particular in a stronghold. And that is because when it comes time to battle, Ecaz basically gets to decide which of the two of them is going to actually fight that battle. And of course, they can discuss that, and they can say, all right, look, you have the better cards. Or you, with your card knowledge, Atreides, knows which one of us is going to be able to counter the other player based on what you know that they have and what they've picked up in certain bidding rounds. So that, being able to sync that up is going to be especially effective. And of course, anytime Ecaz is in an alliance, they can help an ally to buy cards, and they can say, look, why don't we focus on one of us having the best possible combination of treachery cards, so that when we're in a battle, we can make sure that that's the player that actually is going to fight the battle. There's a couple other things that they also bring to the table here, and that has to do with protecting themselves from traitors. Now, at the Atreides, they have the Kwisatz Haderach, which they should be working early in the game to unlock. They have to lose 7 forces in battle, but then they're going to get that +2 that they can bring into one of their battles each turn. And it also prevents anybody from calling traitor on them. So the Kwisatz Haderach, especially useful. For Ecaz, it's Duke Vidal, and this is a 6-strength leader with no traitor card. So they're also protected from face dancers with Tleilaxu in the game. So there's a couple of ways that you can leverage Duke Vidal, but it all circles around using that Duke Vidal ambassador token, the Ecaz ambassador. They place that into a stronghold, and somebody brings forces into that stronghold, they can trigger it. Now, Atreides will not trigger it because your ally doesn't trigger it, and of course Ecaz doesn't trigger it. So it's going to take another faction to do it, but it's often pretty easy to place an ambassador somewhere where there's a high likelihood that it's going to be triggered. So when someone triggers the Ecaz ambassador, it means that Ecaz can get Duke Vidal, but they can also always have their ally benefit from a triggered ambassador token. So they can get that ambassador into Atreides' hand, so that they have 2 leaders in a turn that can fight battles without having to worry about a traitor. So that might be especially effective, just depending on how things work out with the battles and who they're going to get into a fight with, and who they know they have safe leaders against, if any. And along the same lines with the Ecaz ambassador, all of the other ambassador tokens, of course, can be triggered to benefit Ecaz, but they can also be triggered to benefit Atreides. So they're depending on the mix. So that's going to be a real wild card. It's an X factor, because the mix of ambassador tokens that Ecaz gets is going to be random at the start of the game. And if they trigger the 5 extra ambassadors that are not the Ecaz one, then they're going to be putting all 5 of those back into a box or a bag or whatever and drawing 5 at random again. So you're never sure what mix you're going to get, but Ecaz should be putting out at least one, if not two ambassadors each turn during the end of revival so that they can get them onto the board. Similar to how the Moritani can use their terror tokens to steer people away from strongholds. Ecaz can do that as well, but it's usually less effective as a deterrent simply because there's no harm that's going to necessarily come to whoever triggers it. Now, that's not necessarily true of all of them. So, for instance, the Atreides ambassador, if you trigger it, Ecaz gets to see your hand. Now, the Atreides would never trigger it because you never trigger your own ambassador. So the Bene Gesserit are immune from the BG ambassador, and the Emperor doesn't trigger the Emperor's ambassador. But like I said, you can usually place those tokens somewhere where there's going to be some activity. Somebody's going to have to come in to stop you from winning or to bolster their own forces if you come in on the attack. So the ambassadors can be very effective. And the great thing about the Ecaz ambassador is it does let Ecaz get into an alliance when there hasn't been a nexus. So there may be no alliances, or there may be some alliances, but Ecaz isn't in one, and they can use that token to trigger an opportunity to get into alliance. But for the purposes of this, we're going to assume that they're already allied with the Atreides, or something happened earlier to form that scenario. So this is how they're going to get into it together. So that's the real strength, of course, is the card knowledge plus the prescience in the battle. So if, for instance, they have managed to get one of the two members of this alliance to have two types of weapons or two types of defenses, they can work around that. And then they've got some protection, more than any other faction, against traitor calls with Duke Vidal and the Kwisatz Haderach together. So naturally, the Occupy advantage, very effective because it bolsters the strength of your forces in a territory. So if Ecaz can get a decent number of forces in there, they're going to add half of them to the battle plan, irrespective of which of the two factions is in that battle. So with the Occupy, it's always going to be whoever is Ecaz's ally. Their forces are the ones dialed. Even if it's Ecaz fighting the battle, they would be dialing Atreides' forces. But half of their forces are going to add, rounded up, to the total, and at full strength in advance without needing spice. So that is a very effective way to help you get the edge on these battles. The Ecaz leaders without Duke Vidal, they're sort of middle of the road. They're not super spectacular, but likewise the Atreides leaders, they've got 2 5s, which is nice, but they don't have a 6 or a 7, obviously. So, but I think with a couple of decent strength leaders and the bonus from the Occupy, a potential bonus from Kwisatz Haderach if the Atreides are the ones fighting it, or the 6 strength leader from Duke Vidal, they're going to be competitive in most battles. Neither of these factions is an economy faction, so they have no income. But in advanced, if they can get themselves into Arakeen, Carthag, Tuik Siege, and they're co-occupied there, both factions will be getting the spice and spice collection for basically the taxes on there. So instead of just one of the factions getting 2 spice for Arakeen, they would both get 2 spice. And that's double the spice, which it's not a huge amount, but it is nice. There's a couple of tokens that the ambassadors that Ecaz can use. The Emperor one will get them some spice. They've got a couple that will let them get a different treachery card or upgrade it or so on. So they've got some tricks up their sleeve. They start with a little bit more spice than the Atreides, but that's not going to last very long, especially because they have to pay to get the ambassadors down onto the planet as well. So it's a mixed bag income-wise, but they can co-occupy territories when going after spice, and when it's time to collect it, if they're both in that territory, they can divvy that up however they want. So it is an incentive for them to go after spice together, working as a team. And depending on how the storm order works and the turn orders, they can be very effective at getting into at least 3 strongholds together. And they can win if they're co-occupied in 3 strongholds by the end of a game turn. They don't necessarily have to be in 4. So the co-occupy effect, it can be very strong if they can survive through the end of the round and have at least one of their forces for both factions in those strongholds. So that's what you're going to get out of the Marriage Alliance. Let me know in the comments if you have any other insights or if you have questions about these, if you've seen these in action. I've seen it in action. It can be very effective. The Atreides are always an attractive ally for most factions. But Ecaz should start getting that same kind of reputation. I think Occupy can be very powerful, and in the right mix of ambassadors at the right time can be leveraged very effectively. And of course, Duke Vidal, that shifty looking character, 6 strength, but no worries about traitors and face dancers. That can be a nice insurance plan especially when you're really worried about fighting somebody like the Harkonnen and you need to get through that one battle. So that's it for this one. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see